Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm excited to be here today, talk about leadership development with Pete Costa, Umbrex member, and he is also the host of the podcast Leading Excellence. So take a minute right now, just pause and go to iTunes, subscribe to Leading Excellence. And now that you're back, Pete, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
So nice double meaning with your podcast title. Tell me a little bit about, the double meaning there of leading excellence.
Sure. Well, it's two related items. And on my podcast, I explore the concepts of leadership, both what makes an excellent leader, but also what it's like to be a leader driving excellence in your organizations. And I do that by interviewing real world leaders of different organizations. And I ask them about kind of their journey, what they learned along the way, how they help develop leaders in their organization, and just learn from that.
Cool. So I'm interested here in a 101 on what we mean by leadership development. And before we start recording, I was telling you that, I've had, myself a range of experiences in life, where I've got, observed leaders, hopefully developed to some degree as a leader, but I never had like formal saying, okay, now we're having a leadership development expert, come and, do leadership development training for you, Will. In the Navy, I got to observe my superior officers, and they would, give me coaching and some direct feedback from time to time. And at McKinsey, I got to observe people, but never had leadership development programs. So tell me a little bit about what a leadership development consultant would do.
Sure. So, well, in my practice, I do two particular areas that fall under the big umbrella of what I would call leadership development. So I do one-on-one coaching with executives and rising talent. I also work with organizations to help them build out a comprehensive leadership development program, which may or may not include that kind of level of coaching, but would also include the kind of things that you're talking about. And this is something that comes out in a lot of people I enter the podcast. That experience you had in the Navy, and I had the same one, of having a chance to actually observe good leaders and bad leaders is very powerful. So organizations, for an example, can be purposeful about setting up opportunities for junior people to watch how the decisions are made, how the leaders act. That's one example of it. There can be formal training in different aspects of leadership and management, which is a different but related concept. But more specifically, what I do with the coaching is try to help people understand who they really are, how they show up for others, and then how to use that to be as effective a leader as they can be. I don't believe that we need to go fundamentally change ourselves. I don't believe there's one good way to be a leader. I think we've all seen lots of people who do it in lots of different ways. So I don't try to coach people to be something they're not, but I do try to help them understand how to be better at what they do and also pitfalls to look out for.
How do clients get to the point and determine that we need to engage a leadership development consultant?
In the cases where I'm brought in to do coaching, it's generally they've got either a high potential that they both want to develop, but also it's a retention thing for them, right? The war for talent is as fierce right now as it's ever been. We see that in the news all the time. Employees, maybe more than anything else, want to feel that they're valued and the company cares about, the organization cares about them. It's broader than just companies. So making the investment in leadership development is a very tangible way to do that. So that will be part of it. Sometimes it is you've got a leader who's been very successful up to a point, but they're going to step into a new role, which may require some new skills, and helping them with that transition. That's some of the most interesting work, because you often find that what's worked really well for the person in the past is going to get in the way going forward. So that's where there's a lot of hard self-reflection and learning some new skills. But when you think about what these organizations are going to invest in these folks going up, it's a pretty small effort to make with a pretty big reward.
It's pretty difficult to change your own behavior. Certainly know that. I mean, even trying to implement some very simple daily habits can be a lot of work. Talk to me about, maybe give me some specific exercises you do, or specific aspects that you work on. So you mentioned before that you work with your clients, the one-on-one clients, on kind of who they are and how they show up for others. Can we do it like a double click on that and get into some specifics? Give me some case examples perhaps, or some, some exercises or questions, or things you'll have people work on to illustrate that.
Sure. And you're absolutely right. Change is really hard. Again, my view is that we don't fundamentally change who we are. Our values, the things that motivate and drive us, really don't change that much. Our personality, whether we're introverted or extroverted, we learn by reading, or, more tactile. Those things I think are pretty well ingrained. I don't seek to change those things. But I do start, as I think any change starts, with kind of, a deep understanding of what the truth is. So we use a variety of tools to raise that awareness, whether it's something, personality tests like Myers-Briggs or DISC or Hogan assessment are all quite good. 360s can be powerful if they're done well. I like to interview a bunch of folks ahead of time. I'll bring all of this together and then sit down with my client and have a good conversation about it. And a lot of it is about, hey, here's your strengths, right? I am a believer that we should try to play to our strengths. But with all of our strengths, when they're taken too far, they can become negatives, right? You may be an incredibly dynamic leader out from the front charging, and that is great in many situations. But sometimes that results in you running over people and them getting disenchanted. So being aware of that as a downside, and being aware of when that can come out, whether it's in stressful situations or maybe just the wrong setting, is really important. So starting with that, and there's a lot of effort into this, and there's obviously a lot of trust that needs to be built before we get into that discussion, but it's the foundation of what the work's going to be. Get past that. Get the person really bought into, okay, here are some things that I need to work on because they can get in the way of my future success. And quite honestly, many of us are already aware of some of those things, but they're kind of tucked away back in our head. What we're not aware of is just how limiting some of those behaviors can be. And then what I try to do is, because we don't change who we are, but we can change some of our behaviors, right? And even that is quite hard, but I like to get to a point that's very, very practical in terms of changing how we show up. So I'll give you one example. I know a person I work with who pretty introverted, powerful leader, but he's processing inside his head. So when he's going out and walking around in the office, he's processing up in his head. Folks are seeing that, and they're taking that as, hey, there's something going on here, or he's not coming across as warm, or all those other things that many people want to get out of this leader. That's actual feedback that came out. Now, this is a person who also showed up when we went through it. He cared deeply about people. It just, they weren't perceiving him that way. So very simple thing. Took a sticky pad, drew a smiley face on it, and put it on his doorway going out. Every time he walked out that door, he saw that thing, and it reminded him to take a breath, smile, and walk around. And then that grew into him getting more comfortable with taking the time to just chat with folks and the rest of it. And people actually noticed the difference. It was pretty powerful and a pretty simple thing for him to do.
Do you have like a sort of a book or a set of exercises that you kind of pull from, some kind of bag of tricks that you'll pull from to, have people either reflect on or try things out? I'm curious about that, where, maybe it's list things that irritate you or list things that childhood experiences where you felt a certain way, or I mean, do you kind of curious about that aspect of coaching, if you have like this inventory of things that you'd pull off the shelf to use in certain situations?
Yeah, good question. I certainly don't have a one size fits all approach. And coaching is unique. And I got into coaching after about 30 years of being a leader myself, in the Navy and the public companies and privately held companies. I thought coaching was just going to be kind of like mentoring, like, let me share all my wisdom with you. And after going through the training and seeing what actually worked and working with a coach myself, I learned the real power of it is more in asking the right questions and reflecting back what you observe to help the person get to what's right for them, right? Because if like we were working together, my experiences may be helpful or maybe not, but I don't know necessarily what's right for you, Will. Right? I can tell you what was right for me in that situation, but you're a different person and it may be a slightly different situation that won't be right. So I don't jump right to the, okay, you've explained the issue. Here's the three things you can go try to do. What I do have is a broad set of experiences and references and the rest of it that I would go to. So, for example, prior company I worked at, we had a lot of people in leadership roles who lacked some basic management skills. They'd never been exposed to this stuff, so they hadn't learned it. So I went back to some timeless classics like Peter Drucker, who has some great stuff about here's time management, here's how the executive should spend their time, here's how they should free it up. Very practical advice specifically for that. But I don't come into any relation to say, here's your required reading list before we move forward.
Got it. Beyond the one-on-one coaching, tell me more beyond that, what else does a typical leadership development program include? So if we hear that, company XYZ is now decided to spend money on a leadership development program, what are typically all the elements of that?
So the best leadership development programs I've seen are really quite comprehensive. They're purposeful. They're part of the management operating system. So pretty much any organization is going to have some kind of a, annual performance review or something like that. Good companies make most of that discussion a chance to talk about, in a broad audience, who are the rising talents and pretty far down into the organization, and what do they need to do to continue to stretch and to feel valued here. Not that, they shouldn't care about all the folks in the organization, but there is going to be a specific focus and slating of some of the key talents. So what does that look like? And, it can be things like, okay, they need this experience. Where can they go find that role? Let's get them on that. They need this specific course, or maybe they need an executive coach. So there's a purposeful thing right in that process, and there's a follow-up process. And this is all tied into the management operating system, and the senior leader takes an active role in these things. So that's part of it. There's a lot of cultural things also, and a lot of this came on my podcast. Organizations that do this well let people into the room. Right. So if it's a discussion that's not overly sensitive, maybe it's HR, overly sensitive things like HR matters or maybe M&A or things like that, they're letting junior folks come into the room at a minimum to observe. But if that junior folk has been part of a team that prepared a report or a recommendation, good organizations and good leaders let those people present it. Now, they prepare them for it so it goes well, but they give them those experiences. good leadership development organizations have a culture where people share people. They're more interested. They've got a common goal of making their people better. So they're willing to give up their best person to go to another assignment where they can get stretched and develop from that. So those are some of the those are just some aspects of what a good leadership development program could look at an organization. Many times there's also going to be some formal training of some sort that's done in-house. In past plays, so I talked a little bit about when I was helping that one organization develop just specific management skills. And that literally got to the point of running calls every other week to talk about the basics of here's a balance sheet and here's why it matters. Because again, they'd never been exposed to that. So it can be also almost classroom type training. So there's a full range of things that go into it. But I think it does start with having a purposeful approach to it that is driven by leadership. And then you fill in what works after that.
Now, on your podcast, you interview leaders and to understand their journey to how they gain leadership skills. What are some of the insights or things that surprised you that you've heard and learned by hosting a show?
Yeah, there've been a couple great ones. I think the biggest one is there's no one right path to leadership. If you're interested in the big role at some point, you don't have to. There isn't like this check the box. You must do all these things. All the people I've interviewed got to where they got to by following what they were passionate about, following their interests, and jumping at opportunities as they came along, if they moved them in the right direction. And so, that could mean somebody who's got very limited financial training take on a CFO role. That's kind of scary. It's risky. But they were interested in it, and it was a chance to learn. So they jumped into it. It could be stepping out of a line management role to go do a functional role because it was going to give you the experience of how the broad organization works, so you're ready when you take over for that. I mean, the Navy was also good about this in terms of moving folks around from position to position. So when you do finally get to be the head of a ship, you've seen all aspects of running a ship, so you've got a basic understanding of it. So that is a big one. Is there's no one path. Follow your interests. The second big one is how many folks thought they were heading in one direction and something would happen, and they redefined what they wanted to. And that's when usually their careers took off. I think some of the best conversations in the podcast are when folks fall down. They thought they knew what they wanted to do. Something failed. And it got them to realize that, hey, this isn't actually what I want to do. Sometimes it's, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm going to brush myself off and go back after it. But some of the really neat ones were, this isn't what I want to do with my life. And I need to re-examine it. And then they find their passion and they run after it. That's a scary thing too, though, to let go of everything up until that point. So those are some really neat parts of the conversation. And then there's just a wealth of good ideas, some of which I've already talked about how they built excellence in their organizations and how they develop their younger leaders.
How have you developed your own practice in terms of the client development side of building awareness and so forth? For some other types of consulting, it might be slightly different, but leadership development, there's it's a field where lots of people could call themselves experts in that. So how have you gone about developing your clients?
Sure, and that's the challenge that we all have. I've got two client streams. One is the corporations where I'll be working with them on their corporate leaders. I also do private coaching as well, which will sometimes touch on leadership, but it actually gets a lot more into people just trying to going through some major changes in their life, career changes, often helping them through that. Let me set that aside. Let me talk about the corporate side of it. It's tons of networking. I'm very lucky that in my 30 years of operational leadership, I got to work in a lot of great organizations and make a lot of really strong relationships. And I think one of the most enjoyable parts about going from being in a line management role into working for myself was all of a sudden a big part of my job was getting back in touch with people from a year ago and 5 years ago and even 30 years ago and reconnecting. That was a tremendous fun. And, most of those, it's just a great chance to catch up. And sometimes something comes up. And I need to be better about this. I also find that trying to keep a presence on social media, for me, that's LinkedIn, is helpful. I got one great client simply because I had posted it was my 1 year anniversary of founding my company. And it just so happened that he'd come out of a meeting prior to that saying, hey, we've got a talent that we really want to invest in. So it was just being there and being top of mind for him. So those are those kind of the main areas where I developed the practice. The good thing is, with the type of work that I do, if you go in and you do a good job, people will see the change in the person you work with, and they ask you to come back and do some more. So the trick right now is building up that kind of that stable of organizations to work with.
Fantastic. Well, we can include a link to your podcast in the show notes, so people want to check it out. Any other links that we should include, or if info for people that want to follow up with you, Pete?
Sure. I'll share the link to my website, CapmanLLC.com, where you can get an overview of all the services I offer and a little bit more about me and some references of the work that I've done. And they can also contact me at peter.costa@capmanllc.com.
Fantastic. We'll include that info in the show notes. Pete, it was great having you on the show today. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Will. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you and share some of these thoughts.